Hello and welcome to another Property Solvers podcast. And today it's great to be joined by Simon Taylor from Empty Property Hunters. How are you doing, Simon?
All good, all good. Thank you, and you. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me on the episode on the show.
great stuff. Yeah, likewise. Big thanks for coming on. As I do with many guests, I came across what you do there at the Empty Property Hunters via LinkedIn. And I saw one of the properties you recently acquired. I think it was in West London. And I thought it'd be interesting for our listeners, both who are both buyers and sellers, to find out a little bit more about what you do there. So perhaps you can start by giving us a little bit of background into your career and what you've been involved in property and all that good stuff.
Okay, right. Well, where do I begin? So, unlike most people, I always wanted to get into property. I just enjoyed talking about houses, land, deals, refurbs. I think just adding value was always a passion of mine, and the logical step when I was young was to step into estate agency, and I've had a variety of roles in estate agency, and in many respects, I still am a born and bred estate agent. It's an industry that I love. It's often an industry that I hate. And there's been times where it's taken up all my time, and then there's been periods through my life where it's taking up a smaller percentage of my time. I've always been, when being an agent, I've always tried to find deals. How do I add value here? Can I buy something off market? Where's the angle? I've always enjoyed that, as well as bread and butter estate agency. And then over the last few years, I've kind of taken my foot off the estate agency gas. I'll never turn down an instruction or a bit of business, and if it aligns with me in terms of the property and the vendor, the owner, and their expectations on price, etc. But what is taking up a large chunk of my time these days is empty property hunters, and that is unearthing empty, abandoned homes that haven't been lived in for years and years and years, and trying to find the whereabouts of the owner, understand what the story is, and discover if it's something that they perhaps consider selling, if it is indeed surplus to requirements. So, Empty Property Hunters is a venture of mine that has been in the background for a couple of years now, but the volume is amplifying and amplifying as we're doing more and more deals. And there's a lot more coverage across social media now for Empty Property Hunters. And we're encouraging people of all walks of life, when they're out and about, walking the dog, on the way to the shops, if they spot something that looks, God, what's going on with that house? Is it empty? Is there anybody living there? God, the curtains haven't, the curtains have seen better days. The bins haven't been taken out for years. The garden's very overgrown. We're incentivizing members of the public to send it to us. And we're then seeing if we can try and find the owner to see what they want to do with the property. And that is in essence what Empty Property Hunters is all about. And yeah, we've got everybody from tradesmen to members of the public, and we also have a number of estate agents sending us possible leads, properties that they maybe don't know an awful lot about, but it's something that they've maybe passed or are aware of when they're maybe doing some comps or walking to the office or on their way to a viewing, and they're like, well, what's going on with number 43? There's no signs of life there. That looks like an interesting one. So yeah, we're having a lot of fun with it.
It's great. I mean, it's interesting because there's always a discussion, even in, as the new Labour government have come in, about building new housing stock when we've got a huge amount of empty properties just still sitting out there. I think it's something like 300,000. Is it correct, or would that be
300,000, and that excludes, that's in England alone, and that excludes second homes. There are crazily more empty properties in the UK than there are homeless people, which is surely mad.
Yeah.
And listen, I'm not for a draconian, but we've got to tell people what they can and can't do with their properties. Each to their own. This is capitalism, but it does seem crazy that we've got so many empty, abandoned, neglected houses in good areas, good established areas near schools, transport, shops, etc. And we're not utilising them, and we're talking about building on green belt. And I'm a big believer in, well, why would I convert my loft or add on a rear extension before refurbishing the rest of my house? So we really just want Empty Property Hunters to flush out properties that are simply going to waste, to allow them to be used and repurposed and refurbished and allow them to be great houses again, really. So yeah, share your sentiments.
And why do you think, in your experience, people are leaving these properties empty? Is it just because they've maybe inherited them, or there's some kind of complex probate situation going on? What kind of
Okay.
reasons
Yeah. So
can there be?
it's often
Yeah.
probate. Somebody's died, and there's maybe a contested will. Sometimes people there's mental health issues that we often come across. There's hoarding issues. There's sometimes people are living away from the property, and before you know it, years have gone past. 3 years have gone past quite quickly. Maybe there's a couple I can think of where this summer when we traced an owner down to Nova Scotia who just kind of just forgotten about the house, but realized that they really should do something about it, but they just couldn't be bothered to come back to the UK.
Right.
There's one where we're in discussions with an owner in South Africa who hasn't moved the car off the driveway for 8 years. Now, if you haven't moved a car off the driveway for 8 years, your car is dirty, and if you haven't cut your front grass for 8 years, you can be pretty sure it's going to need a bit of a haircut. So there's a variety of reasons, but quite often people have just moved away and out of sight, out of mind, or in so many cases there's sentimentality, there's sentimental reasons for keeping hold of a property just in case. I never know, I might need it at some point. And quite often, which surprises us, is many people aren't necessarily motivated by money. There's no, we're thinking, why would you keep that house that you're not living in and it's surplus to requirements and it's worth £250,000? Why would you not, I don't know, spend some money and rent it out, or take that £250,000 and put it to use, or I don't know, treat yourself, go on holiday. But interestingly, money capital is not a motivator. Which, given the cost of living, etc., we thought more sellers, more people may, more owners of these such properties may come out of the woodwork and come onto the market simply because cost of living, everything's got more expensive. But no, the number of empty homes just seems to be growing and growing.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess with people keeping hold of these properties, they've still got to pay empty council tax, the overheads, if they are running the property and they haven't just abandoned it, they've still got a few costs that they have to incur.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. There's standing charges for gas and electric and water and council tax, and in many local authorities have penalties. So if you're keeping a property empty, you're paying an empty council tax premium.
mm,
Now whether how many people are declaring that the property's empty is another thing, but yeah, these assets, because they are assets, or these homes, are costly for the owner. Now, some may say, well, it's going up in value, so if it costs me a few quid every month, then it's no big deal. But it's surely not the best use of a property.
yeah. And I guess there's another risk, particularly in London and the south, of squatters coming into the property as well, right? And taking over
There is
households.
that, and we tend to come across that most, as you say, in London rather than elsewhere in the country. We do periodically come across properties that are squatted or have been squatted, and there's maybe boards or hoardings or metal grates out the front, and that's simply because that the owner is just, should we say, paranoid of that incident happening again. Now, for you and I, if it was squatted, if a property that we own was squatted, we may take the view of, well, it's time to get rid of it, or maybe we'll refurbish it and repurpose it and get it lived in again, get it habitable. But yeah, everybody's different, and everybody has different agendas.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a problem that isn't going away, and sadly, I don't think any government, whether it be Conservative, Tory, or Labour, is taking it sufficiently seriously. Um, and every council up and down the country is dealing with thousands of empty homes, and it's just, given where we are, population growth and explosion, it's a crying shame.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And what's the situation with Bona Vacantia? So effectively, when someone passes away with no will or no family, the property passes on to the crown as an effectively an ownerless property. What happens there? Could you maybe give us a little bit of a background into what
Well,
occurs in that kind of
there's
scenario?
often not a lot we can do, and we thankfully don't come across it very often. I can think of one example. The last example that it did occur was in a prosperous suburb of East London called Wanstead,
Right.
and it was a detached house, and the garden was a complete, and this is the front garden, a complete and utter jungle. In actual fact, there was branches climbing all over the front door. So if you were the postman, you wouldn't have even bothered going onto the door. It was probably one of the worst that we've seen, and it was an exciting house and a lovely road with a market value refurbished of probably 1.1, 1.2 million pounds. And it's something that we would love to get our teeth stuck into, but it was an elderly lady, a spinster that was living there, and she passed away, and we didn't know of any next of kins. Neighbours weren't able to point us in any directions, and yeah, we discovered that it was no will, and yeah, the government's going to be it's nice revenue for the government, but yeah, it doesn't happen. I don't know the actual the number of estates that go into that, but it does occur. It's easy money for the government, but yeah, I guess it's for any listeners out there. If you haven't got any living relatives or anybody close to you that you want to leave your money to, well, you know what, you should get a will and maybe donate it all to charity. Because if you don't, you know what, the government's going to take the lot.
Yeah, yeah. And what does the government do? They effectively just keep it, and do they
Yeah,
they keep it?
it
Do
takes,
they do the
and the
work?
sad thing is, it takes years. So this property in Wanstead that I'm referring to, it's still as it is. Nothing seems to be happening with it. When that's eventually going to be flushed out by the government and sold, goodness knows.
Right. Yeah, they just sit on it effectively. Yeah, interesting.
I suspect it'll go to some government department at some time, and then it will be put on the open. Well, it'll most likely be sold at auction, with
Interesting.
HMRC, Her Majesty, His Majesty's tax revenues, coffers being filled.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, that does make sense. A public auction for it to basically get
Yes,
maximum price for it at auction.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
That's typically what would happen. But it's an interesting one, and the exact number of cases of people die in such circumstances with leaving no will. It's very sad. Thankfully, it's not that often, and there's no doubt thousands of cases per annum. But at Empty Property Hunters, we maybe see one of those a quarter.
Right. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so probably the most obvious examples of properties that are quote unquote empty are the ones that look visibly run down. What are the other signs that people would be able to, spot when to kind of spot an empty house? Are there any kind of common signs that you generally see? I mean, obviously you mentioned
There
overgrown
are. So it's
gardens.
typically empty bins. Now we don't suggest people, look through bins, but yeah, and then if there's no bin, that means if the bin's empty and all the other houses have full bins because bin days, the next day, then that's a pure sign that nobody's in residence. Curtains that are perhaps permanently drawn, overgrown gardens is pretty obvious. A build-up of post on a front doorstep, there's nobody's picking up the mail. Dirty windows, broken gutters. We've got one at the moment that we're dealing with in East Ham where there's a hole in the roof and there's pigeons coming in and out. There's nobody there. Cars that haven't moved off driveways, cars with maybe flat tires or with green moss growing around the windows. That's always a good telltale sign. Just really a general sense of shabbiness, disrepair. And we did a marketing campaign around Halloween. Are there houses, are there properties in your area that the children are frightened of? Who is there a scary? Do they think that somebody scary is living at number 14,
Haunted.
the
Yeah,
house around
yeah.
the corner, because it's so, should we say, haunted looking? So those generally fit the bill. Now we don't get it right every time, and as we said off air before we did the podcast, started the podcast, which is sometimes a house will meet all the textbook criteria of looking decrepit, in disrepair, overgrown, but in actual fact, there's somebody living there. So
Right.
sometimes appearances can be deceptive, but those are typically the main clues, the giveaways, the signs, the signals that tell you that, oh, that could be interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so without revealing too many of your industry secrets, say for example, you do come across a property that's empty. What is your approach? Just to kind of give you an example, I'm based in Sutton, and near where I live, further up the road, there's these two beautiful pair of semi-detached houses. And I've been here for about 8 years, and I've walked past, and everyone walks past these houses and just sees like there's just so much potential. Like I don't know how much they'd be worth when done, but I'd imagine it'd be a lot of money. And it's strange because you walk or drive past it and you see this like light that's sometimes switched on, sometimes not. And I've almost been scared to kind of knock on the door. So what I did was I went to the land registry, downloaded the title register, found out the name of the owner. It turns out the owner was actually based in the same area. Wrote a few times, but didn't get any response. And then I just kind of left it. So I just wondered if you have any other kind of tips or suggestions as to what you would actually do to kind of approach
Well,
the
it's
the
persistence, and we do have a team that are pretty skilled at it and know all the best ways to go about it. But it's sometimes as simple as asking the neighbor, the next door neighbor. Sometimes the next door neighbor is a fountain of all knowledge.
Mm,
Um, we had one, let me tell you, we had one where we were just getting nowhere with finding the owner or a next of kin or a family member or anything like that. So we spoke to the neighbor next door, and the neighbor next door said, "Well, in actual fact, yes, I remember the lady that lived there. Now she lived there from the 1980s, but she moved out in 1993. Now she did come back briefly in 1994, but I've not seen her since 1994. But Simon, the name that you're telling me that you think owns the house, that's not the name that I knew her as, right?" So the lady was actually using her middle name as her first name,
right.
which meant we were just drawing blanks. So we played around with the names, and we actually were able to then find a relative of the lady who was able to fill us in on what was happening. So neighbours are a fountain of all knowledge. Now that might mean, speaking to the neighbour on either side or the neighbour opposite the road. Sometimes we'll do things on LinkedIn or Ancestry, Find My Past,
Right.
and we try and sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it can be quite tricky, and sometimes if it's a really common name, I don't know, John Smith, for instance, the cliched common name. Not that I know anybody called John Smith. But there's in a country of 70 million people, sometimes having um, a less common name. Your name would be a dream because I don't know how many have your name, Ruben, in the
I
UK.
don't think
Sure.
there's many, if
They
at
don't.
all.
So you would be a dream to find.
Yeah, yeah.
All you'd
I'm,
have
I'm
to
very
do is,
Googleable.
if we were struggling with the next door neighbors, we'd probably all we'd have to do is plug your name into Google. So we'll sometimes use Google, sometimes use Facebook. But I'll tell you, if I'd put your name into LinkedIn, I think we'd hit the jackpot.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, that's very true. It's often good to kind of just have a chat with
And you
people.
know what? Being candid, sometimes we hit dead ends. Sometimes we hit dead ends, and sometimes people just don't want to be found. And sometimes we'll try everything, every trick in the book, and sometimes we'll have forwarding addresses for people, and we'll write to them there. So sometimes, good old, just as you did with your example near you, pen and paper. But I'd be crazy not to take this opportunity to say, Ruben, send us over the addresses of the two properties that you're referring to. We might be able to find the owner somewhere and have a conversation with them. I don't know.
I will do. I will do.
And
Actually, it's a good idea because it's
and
funny because you always see people kind of floating around that house because everyone just admires the house. A beautiful like, Edwardian Victorian property, and yeah, it's
so
one of those that's just a crying shame that it's just being left there.
so listen, if for a property that is empty, so anybody that sends us an empty property, right, or suspected empty property, as long as it's not owned by the council, it's owned privately, and it's been empty for 12 months or more, which we can see, we can do some checks on that, and we pay £20. Even if we don't buy it, we pay £20. But we are now, so it's quite nice, easy revenue for estate agents, buy-to-let landlords, developers in their area. If they spot something, they can earn a quick 20 quid. But let's be honest, nobody's doing it for the 20 quid. But if we are able to agree a purchase with the owner after we find if we're successful at finding them, then we're typically paying 1% as a finder's fee reward, simply for taking a picture and sending us in the address. Now, for listeners of your podcast who are maybe more, I don't know, buy to let, property, state agency,
Yeah.
if there's something in their doorstep which they'd love to buy, but they're just struggling to find out where the owner is, what we do often do is joint ventures.
Right.
So, we're forward thinking and quick minded property guys, just like you. And yeah, if there's a deal to be done and we can join hands on a joint venture partner where we are successful at agreeing a sale, a purchase, finding the owner, and then putting in a portion of the funds alongside the introducer, then that's great. That's another empty home, brought back into circulation.
It's great. And how would people do that? Is it a case of just taking a photo, texting you the address, or WhatsApping you?
Yeah,
What's the
so
best way
so
for people?
the best thing to is our website is emptypropertyhunters.co.uk.
Brilliant.
And on there, there's a big orange button where they can submit a property.
Right.
And they can either fill in a form on the website, the old-fashioned way, or
Mhm.
they can, if it's easier for them, as many people do now, and we have a WhatsApp button. So if you WhatsApp us, that comes, you can WhatsApp us instead, and people could find me on LinkedIn, Simon Taylor. You can DM me, but yeah, we're open to all sorts of conversations with regards to anything to do with empty properties. We're pretty good at what we do, and whilst we aren't successful every time at finding the owner of a property, we don't tend to give up. We're like dogs with a bone, and we'll go down as many rabbit holes as we possibly can to flush things out.
Yeah, I think that's great, and it's what's needed, because you'd be surprised when you actually start looking how many properties are seemingly derelict or seemingly have got this potential. But
Well, you're 100% correct. And I suppose the bug that I got is being an agent in East London, and I was just sick and tired of seeing so many. And I remember going to a valuation as an estate agent, and I'm knocking them around the doorbell, and I'm waiting for the gentleman to answer the door, and it's a mid-terrace house, and I look at the house next door and go, "Oh my God, look at the state of that. There was rubbish strewn everywhere, cobwebs over the door. You could tell that it hadn't been painted. The front door windows hadn't been painted for probably, I don't know, 40 years, something like that."
Right.
And I thought, crikey. And I went, just being the nosy busybody that I am, I guess, I have a good rapport I'll go into the valuation. And I say to him, "Well, what's the story with the house next door?" "Oh, well, there's been nobody there in the 9 years that I've lived here." So I really had a bee in my bonnet to try and get to the bottom of, well, what is going on with this owner? Where are they? What are they doing? What are their plans? Interestingly, I didn't win the business on that valuation, um, but I was able to find the owner of that house property next door and agree a sale with them, and that probably got me on my journey on for empty property hunters.
Right.
Because
Okay. That's good.
they are everywhere. With 300,000 in the UK, there's nobody, whether you're in an affluent area or a less economically successful area, they are everywhere, everywhere.
Yeah.
And if you
And
keep your
also,
eyes and ears open, and we have some people that are sending us in one, two, or three properties. We've got some estate agents that are sending us in properties on pretty much a weekly basis. And we have what we call some super spotters. And these are people that are sending us in probably in the region of 5 to 10 per week,
right. Interesting.
because their
Interesting.
work is taking them out and about to different parts of the country, and they just keep their eyes and their eyes open.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess as well, there's also, I was going to mention the commercial properties as well, commercial buildings or mixed use properties as well.
Yes.
There's quite a lot of them that are standing empty.
Unquestionably, and it is something that we would like to explore. We're not interested in lock-up shops, but buildings that could maybe be repurposed into residential developments or
Yeah.
supermarkets, or where there's buildings where there's more than one use. We would be interested in. It's something that we keep discussing about going down a commercial angle.
Yeah.
But at the moment, the resi stuff, residential houses, is keeping us pretty busy.
That's good. That's good. Well, thanks for your time, Simon.
With pleasure.
Really interesting conversation here. Yeah, I would definitely suggest that people listening in contact Simon. Whatever you're doing in life, walking your dog, just going for a run or whatever it is, you'll be surprised at the amount of properties that you'll come across that fit the bill. So
100%, they're out there, and maybe you'll be more conscious after. Maybe if for anybody that's listened the whole way to the end of this podcast, thank you. And maybe next time you're out and about, you'll start spotting them in the telltale signs. And all you've got to do is head over to emptypropertyhunters.co.uk, and we'd be delighted to help with you and keep you advised and posted of how we get on.
That's great. Thanks again for your time, Simon. Much appreciated.
Not at all. Thank you.
All the best.